Well, thank you all again for coming. Thank you for supporting Dr. Paul Stoller's book, Wisdom from the Edge. Again, you can buy it back there, and he's here to sign it if you'd like. This event is sponsored by the Anthropology Club, the Institute for Race and Ethnic Studies, and the Office of Sustainability, so a big thank you to everyone from those departments. Without further ado, here's Dr. DiGiovanni.
All right, thank you very much. So thanks for coming. Again, I apologize for any hiccups that we had. Thanks especially to the students from our classes who are here, people from the community who are here, and also those who are Zooming in. I saw there's at least about 15 people on. I know there's some from Italy, I think Greece, and some other places. So my name is Michael DiGiovanni. I'm a professor of anthropology here at Westchester University and the director of our Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology, which is in Old Library, where our museum studies students have just opened a new exhibition called Surrounded by the Spirits, Paul Stoller and the Songhai Journey Towards Well-Being. It's celebrating the life work of Paul, who we'll hear from today, on the twilight of his career here at Westchester University.
Sunrise, please.
The sunrise of his new life. Anyway, I wanted to say a few words about Paul really quickly for those of you who are unfamiliar with him. I know my students have to read 3 different books by him. Paul has been here for several decades, let's say. We'll say it that way. I spent his whole career here at Westchester University, and I think it's been a real honor to have him here. He's internationally recognized anthropologist whose work for decades has been, since the 1970s really, has been in West Africa in the country of Niger, among the Songhai people. His work is especially focused on holistic well-being, but especially on spirit possession and magic and witchcraft. And he teaches a very popular course here, Magic, Witchcraft, and Religion. The other thing that's of note, especially for today, is that he's internationally recognized not only for his ethnographic work, but also the way that he has really pioneered a lot of forms of ethnographic writing. As many of you know who take my class, and ethnography is both the ways in which we carry out our qualitative research, but also the ways that we convey it to a public in written or in visual work. And Paul has really pioneered a very accessible form of writing, originally called the ethnographic novel, and then into other kinds of humanistic pursuits. He's done a lot in visual anthropology. He was mentored under a French visual anthropologist named Jean Rouch. He's even won a number of awards. In 2015, I think it was, when you got the last of a couple of awards with the American Anthropological Association on media. And the reason for that, I think, part of that is because he's shifted in the last decade and a half into really bringing anthropology to a broader public in terms of blogging. So he has blogs with the Huffington Post and Psychology Today, and now his own blogs, and his previous book was Adventures in Blogging, I believe it's called. And of course, the big capper, of course, is for all of these contributions, he won the Anders Ritzis Prize. And the Anders Ritzis Prize is what we would have our equivalent in anthropology of the Nobel Prize. Just like in mathematics, there is no Nobel Prize in math, there's no Nobel Prize in anthropology, but King of Sweden bestows this prize every 4 years or so to a global anthropologist who's done significant work in pioneering the discipline. So with all that being said, we're going to hear from Paul, and then of course there's books for his newest book, Wisdom from the Edge. And then, around whenever we're done with this, I'm happy to go over to the museum in Old Library and lead a tour with some of the co-curators of the exhibition. And I think it's a really fascinating exhibition. Has a lot of really interesting artifacts that really bring to life a lot of the things that Paul's going to talk about today. So do stick around afterwards. So, without further ado, Paul Stoller. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, thank you. So it's a great pleasure to be here and be able to talk a little bit about my work to you guys and talk a little bit about my book, Wisdom from the Edge. Before I do that, I just want to extend my thanks to all the people that put together this fabulous exhibit on West African well-being and healing. And I thank Michael very much, and who's the chief curator, Heather Woolley, our department chair, Thomas, how do you pronounce his name?
Like hockey, like the sport.
For the hut that he built, which is a representation of the Spirit Hut. Colleagues Wendy Wilson-Fall, Connolly Casey, and Scott Benstead, who gave advice and also lent some objects to the exhibit. But I'm really very pleased to recognize, and I'm grateful for all the student co-coordinators who put together just a beautiful exhibit. Very professional, beautifully done, a real tribute, it's a heartwarming tribute to me, and I'm kind of speechless about how beautiful the exhibit is, so if you haven't seen it, please go over and take a look at it. It's really quite extraordinary. So, I was very pleased about that. So, let me begin by saying two things. One is, I was passionate about anthropology in the 1970s when I was in my 20s. And guess what? I'm still passionate about anthropology in the 2020s now that I'm in my 70s. And why that passion? What is so passionate about anthropology? Why do it? Why study anthropology or any other social science? Why engage in studies of economics, sociology, psychology, anthropology? What is its purpose, right? And for me, what's really important is that anthropologists have been doing sort of slow research over a long period of time, and they have produced insights that I think are very important in our confrontation with the problems that we face today in the world. We face, enormous problems with our social relations. There's a lot of violence. There's hate. There's war, and then we have ecological problems as well. We have problems, with ecological devastation. Flash flooding, droughts, superstorms, etc. We're all familiar with that. We've just gone through a record heat in the summer. So, and I think that social science, and in my case, anthropology, has something to say about how we deal with these issues that are, quite frankly, they threaten our very existence in the future. Something to take very seriously. So, I do anthropology because I think that the insights that me and my colleagues, and I would say the same thing for other social scientists, have an awful lot to suggest that can help us confront these seemingly unsolvable problems that we face today. Right? So, which you just turn on the news and you see what they are. So that's why I do anthropology, and that's why I've been doing it for a long period of time. Let me tell you a little bit about how I came into anthropology, and my own, what we call in anthropology, a subject position. So when I started studying anthropology in the 1970s, it was a kind of, for me at least, it was kind of an elite, a kind of discipline. And people taking off for a year, doing field work, going to sort of far-off places, sort of a romantic adventure that I never dreamed growing up that I would ever participate in, because I was born in Washington, D.C., and I come from a working-class Jewish family where no one went to college. Never thought that I'd be going to college, and let alone becoming an anthropologist. And when I studied I went to college, I studied philosophy, and my poor mother, may she rest in peace, when she heard that I was studying philosophy, she just about had a heart attack. What can you do with philosophy? Then I said, well, maybe I want to do anthropology. What? What can you do? That's even worse than philosophy. What can you do with that? So, by a number of sort of stumblings, I joined the United States Peace Corps, and I went to West Africa for the first time, and spent 2 years in Niger, Republic of Niger. And in the Republic of Niger, I learned the Songhai language. I happened to be stationed among Songhai-speaking people, and the Songhai people had an empire in West Africa in the 14th century, 14th to the 16th century. So they had a fabled history, and so I went there and learned the language, fell in love with Niger, fell in love with the way people lived, etc., etc. And so when I established some relationships that are ongoing. There's one guy that I met early in my field work that I visited this summer in Germany. A Songhai guy that's a physician in north of Hamburg in Germany. So, so here I was, this sort of working class kind of kid, doing anthropology, and I couldn't imagine someone like me doing research in West Africa of all places, and I couldn't imagine that, whoops, sorry. So, one of the things that struck me during my early time in the Republic of Niger was living in an environment in which people they respected the forces of nature. They respected the power of nature, which they called, the bush. And they respected that power. So in this case, this is a typical dust sandstorm that occurs more or less every year. And I took this photo a long time ago, but the trees are about 20 to 25 feet tall. So you can see that that's like a 100-foot wall of sand and dust coming toward the village, right? So that kind of power impresses people and engenders their respect for nature, right? And it sort of generates a kind of wisdom that they have when they are thinking about the relationship of human beings to nature, right? So, and I met early in my fieldwork, I met elders who were, they didn't speak. They didn't speak any French or English. They spoke Songhai, and I found them to be incredibly wise. They would sit and tell stories, and they talk to me about the relationship of human beings to the bush, the relationship of human beings to nature, how to create harmony in the world between, how to create harmonious relationships between people, but also how to create harmonious relationships between the social life, people in the village, and people and the forces of nature. So they understood what I was doing. Here's this anthropologist, he wants to learn about what we do. And so they imagined, they put a trust in me, this kid from Washington, D.C., to spread their wisdom far and wide. And that has been my challenge through my entire career as an anthropologist. Try to represent with as much fidelity as possible their wisdom and the applicability of their wisdom. So I have this deep humility and a sense of obligation to the memory of my mentors that has been the foundation of my work in anthropology. So whenever I give this talk, I always introduce everyone to my mentors, right? Mentorship is something that is profoundly important in the academy, in life. And if you are fortunate enough to find a mentor someone that will guide you through the trials and tribulations of life, then consider yourself to be quite lucky. So let me introduce you to my mentors here. This man here is my main mentor, Adamu Genitongo, who was a great healer. He lived to be 106 years old, and he was a master herbalist, master healer, and through a series of I met him during my first trip to Niger when I was still a Peace Corps volunteer. He took me under his wing, and he said one of the things that he taught me was this. I'm going to read this passage from my book. Early one morning during ethnographic fieldwork in Tillaberi, Niger, the hottest town in the hottest country in the world, I sat on a beautifully woven palm frond mat in the shade of Adamu Genitongo's thatched spirit hut, which is represented in the exhibit in the old library. For several months, I had been living in my mentor's compound, which he had built at the edge of the village. At sunrise, Adamu Genitongo, my teacher and an important Songhai healer, had told me he wanted to talk to me about important things. Shortly thereafter, he arrived with a brazier full of hot embers. His grandson followed behind, bringing a porcelain platter on which he had placed a teapot, one large water glass, and 2 shot glasses. Adamu Genitongo poured water into the teapot and measured the shot glass full of strong Chinese green tea and put it on the embers. We'll drink tea and talk about life, he said. Not knowing how to respond, I sat quietly. When the tea water boiled, my teacher added sugar and water and went through a pouring ritual, emptying the steeping tea into the water glass and returning it to the teapot 3 times. Finally, he poured tea into our shot glasses and we began to sip. As we sipped the strong tea, we looked at one another for a long moment. You have been coming here for years, he said, breaking the silence. I nodded. And you've learned a great deal. I have much more to learn, I admit. You do, he said, but today I want you to open your ears and understand what's important. I am listening, Baba, father, that's what I called him. He turned his head toward the east and looked beyond the edge of the village to take in the bush, the wild, uninhabited space where powerful spirits live. Good, he said, still looking at the bush. Times are bad. People have lost respect for the old words and the old ways. He turned and looked at me. Our fathers and mothers understood how bad it is for people to speak with 2 mouths and feel with 2 hearts. People who speak with 2 mouths and feel with 2 hearts anger the spirits of the bush. When the bush is angry, there is not enough rain. When the bush is angry, there is too much rain. When the bush is angry, locusts eat our crops and sickness kills our people. He sipped more tea. Several cranes flew overhead. A donkey brayed in the distance. Shaking his head, my mentor continued. Every day, our people do things to anger the bush. Every day, I make offerings to the bush to set things right, to bring one mouth and one heart balance to the world. That is what the elders taught me. That is my work. He finished his tea. That's what I want to teach you. I hope that my work can become your work. So, the bush, or nature, is angry today. He said this 30 years ago, being painfully aware of the power of nature to affect human life, to create human suffering, to displace people. And so, I've already talked about how, when it's 112 degrees in Portland, Oregon, something's not right? You have floods, etc. We've already talked about that. So, so he said, open your ears and generate a respect for nature and bring my words about nature to your people, so that they know that when you're disrespecting nature, when you're extracting things from nature, when you're extracting water and cutting down trees and not replanting, when you are polluting, when you are, when your carbon footprint is too heavy, this 200 years of this has caused the situation that we face today. So he said, open your ears and respect the bush, and have respect for one another, right? Have respect for one another. Even if the other person looks like they're inconsequential, you should try to respect them as best you can, right? You never know who someone is. Sometimes you might think someone is a nobody, and it turns out that the person has great wisdom, or has great secrets, or has great power. You never know. So his suggestion was, try to respect everyone as best you can. So that's Adam and Tom. Second mentor. Second mentor is Fatuma Saini. She was a great diviner, specialist in divination. She would throw cowrie shells, sort of bivalve cowrie shells, which were money in before the money economy hit West Africa. She would throw shells, and she could read the past, read the present, and predict the future, right? And so the way I got to know her was quite by accident. In the village of Mehana, where I did my early field work, I was really interested in cooking, and so I would go in the village and I'd see women pounding millet with a mortar and pestle to mortars, pounding millet seeds into flour, and they would sit around under trees and talk and stuff like that. And I always used to peer in and look at them. And one day, Fatuma Saini, this woman here, said, "Why don't you come in?" I said, "Okay." And the other women sort of giggled. They said, "What is a man? Why would a man want to sit around with women while they're pounding millet?" And I said, "Well, I'm just interested in cooking." So, "Okay, well, just sit down." So I sat down on an overturned mortar, and they went about their business. And I became a regular visitor. And eventually they got used to me, more or less. And they would talk about all their social problems, their marital problems, problems with their families, problems with their kids. And I would just sort of listen. And then one day, when they all left, Fatuma Saini said, "I've heard about you. I heard that you're studying with my cousins, studying magic, learning about plants." And I said, "That's right." He said, "Well, I know something they don't know. Those are my cousins. I do divination, which is called gunya, divination." So I said, "Okay, can you teach me?" She said, "No, I can't teach you." "Why not? You're not ready yet. Come back." So I came back the next year. I asked her, "Can I learn divination?" And she said, "No, you're not ready yet." 5 years passed. Finally, I see her at the market, and she said, "You've been coming back again and again and again. Why don't you come to my compound and bring me a vial of perfume?" So I brought a vial of perfume to her, and she looked at me, and she said, "That's the wrong perfume." I said, "Well, what am I supposed to?" She said, We'll put it in my sacrificial container, and we'll see if Dongo, the thunder god, accepts your offering. And if he accepts your offering, then maybe I could teach you divination." So this is after 5 years of trying, right? So I put in this vial of perfume called Bint al-Hadash, and there's an example of that in the exhibit. And we sat down, we sipped some tea, and she said, "Well, let's check on it." And then she opened up her container, and in the container there was the vial of perfume that I brought was broken into bits. She said, "You see, I told you brought the wrong perfume." So what am I supposed to get? "Bring me Bint al-Sudan," which is another type of perfume. So I brought the Bint al-Sudan, we went through the same process again, and this time, after about 20 minutes, I started smelling the fragrance of Bint al-Sudan, and she said, "You see, he accepts that." I said, "Can I begin to learn?" She said, "Come back next year." So I came back the next year. She started to teach me about the positions of shells and where they represented health or vitality, difficulties, etc., misfortune, good fortune, etc. And so she said, it takes a long time to learn how to read shells and to be a diviner. And she said, my lesson to you is the value of patience and the value of a slow approach to scholarship. For me, it would be a slow approach to scholarship. If you can't do everything, things take time. Things take time. It takes time for the mind to develop to such an extent that it's ready to understand important things, right? Which is, the contrary to our system, where we just sort of speed through things, and, what have you done lately, right? But there, it takes, you have to demonstrate your resolve, your patience. That was her lesson to me. My third mentor is Mumuni Kara, and his picture is in the Spirit Hut at the exhibit. He was my initiator. He prepared for me something called kusu, which is it's made from millet seeds and then various pulverized roots and plants, which you consume if you are going to become an apprentice to a healer. Right? So he prepared that for me, and his great lesson to me was the value of laughter. He said, you white people, you laugh with your heads. We here laugh with our bodies. And so he said, when you learn to laugh with your body, then you will have learned a great lesson. And so I didn't really realize the importance of that. But, one time I returned to Niger after a long hiatus, and I saw this guy that I had known like 20 years before. And he said, you're that white man who laughs with his body. I said, well, how do you know that? Well, you were sitting with my friend, and he was telling the story 20 years ago, and you fell off the chair, you laughed so hard. So, something about laughter that is intrinsically important to well-being. And ultimately, all of these mentors, what they're about is creating an atmosphere of well-being in the world around them. And finally, we have this guy, Jean Rouch. Jean Rouch is one of the greatest ethnographic filmmaker, or documentary filmmaker of the 20th century, inventor of cinema verite. Right? He was, and it's my luck, Jean Rouch his specialty was the Songhai people of Niger, but he did it 30 years before I arrived. Right? And so I met him. Before I even started doing my research, he was seated on a wall at the Research Institute in Niamey, the capital city of Niger. And he is dressed, impeccably, always had khakis on, always had a blue shirt, a silk ascot with a diamond stud, real kind of dandyish kind of guy. And I said, who is this person? Who is this person here? And so I walked, and he looked at me and said, can I help you? And I told him who I was an anthropologist, I was doing Songhai. He said, well, I know that village, I know that area. And I said, well, I didn't know who he was. And I said, well, sir, can I ask what your name is? And he said, I'm Jean Rouch. And I said, oh my God, I was so embarrassed because I had seen all of his films, I had read his books. He was sort of like this famous person, and I didn't know who he was, right? And he said, then we talked for 3 hours, and then he said, this is the beginning of taking a line from the great film Casablanca. This is the beginning of a great friendship, right? So he says, and so he had any number of things, lessons. A lot of my work is patterned after the lessons that he taught me. He was my true mentor. Adamujani Tongo and Jean Proof, they were the most important mentors that I had. And my work is really, the way I look at it is that I am sitting on the shoulders of these mentors. These mentors are the foundation of my work, and my work would not exist if I had not met them, and they had not supported me and encouraged me to continue to do my work. So Rouch said, first thing, and I wrote a piece called The World According to Rouch, which is one of the chapters in my book. So the first thing is be fully engaged, right? So, in other words, be very present. Be very conscious of what you're doing. And let that focus your attention on whatever what's in front of you, right? And so, the second thing he said was, have confidence in your path and see where it takes you. So for example, during fieldwork in New York City, I met this guy at Malcolm Shabazz Harlem Market, which I talked about a little bit, and he said, well, what are you doing here? Come see what I'm doing. And I said, well, I have interviews scheduled. He said, forget that. Go with me. I want to introduce you to something else. And he took me downtown to Chelsea section of Manhattan and introduced me to a 6-story warehouse filled with African art. And it was, it sort of led to many, many discoveries and enriched my research immeasurably. Because I said, okay, I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to stop what I'm doing and follow this lead, because in my gut I felt it was the right thing to do. So he said, always do that. Third thing he said was, open your ears and listen deeply to the elders. All right? So I've talked a little bit about elders already. Listen to the elders. Open your ears. Sometimes I say, you open your ears, listen deeply, deep listening to the elders. Not just listening to their words, but trying to connect with their being as they're talking, right? Deep listening. Open your ears and listen to the elders, because for Songhai people and for Jean Rouch, wisdom comes slowly. So the young mind is not yet developed. So if you are an apprentice, an apprenticeship takes 30 or 40 years to complete. So if you're a young apprentice, you learn the fundamentals because your mind is not developed. And for the Songhai people, the mind stretches with experience. It becomes more and more developed, or ripens, if you will, with experience. And so it's not until you become an elder, which is usually more than 60 years of age, right? After 30 or 40 years of apprenticeship, that your mind is ready to receive the important secrets of whether you're being if you're a weaver, or you're a fisherman, or you're a bard, a poet, or if you are a healer, right? So it took him 40 years studying with his father before his father imparted to him the most important elements of being a healer, right? So that's an important thing. Fourth thing, open yourself to the world and let it enter your being. All right, so meaning that you open your being to other things that you're not familiar with, and which creates an aura of vulnerability, right? And Rouch gets this from painters like Paul Klee, who said, if I'm going to paint a forest, I have to let the forest enter my being. And once it entered my being, I paint to break out. I'm able to paint with a degree of fidelity to the nature of the forest and the nature of the trees there, right? So to open yourself to the world and let it enter your being, and if you make yourself vulnerable, it increases the possibility of human connection, social connection with other people, right? So that's the glue of social life, human connection, right? And if you're reading a book and the author is able to describe her or his vulnerability, or a vulnerable state, or admits that they don't know what they're talking, they're confused. In a way, it encourages the reader to like the author, to connect with the author, and maybe connect with the author's ideas. One of the great anthropologists of the 20th century, Gregory Bateson, his great book, Naven, which I have my students in my theory class read, is filled with the book is filled with self-doubt. So I'm not exactly sure I know what I'm doing. I have this possibility and that possibility. And that kind of honesty, that vulnerable honesty, creates a kind of connection with the reader, right? So, and then finally, learn how to tell a good story. Easier said than done. Learn how to tell a good story. And so from this, and my book, Wisdom from the Edge, is about, a lot of it is about elements of learning how to tell a good story. The art of ethnography, but this is not just limited to anthropology. any scholar, historian, sociologist, psychologist, if they sort of include narrative in what they write, it creates a connection between that person and that person's ideas and the reader, right? Again, always getting back to human connection. So it's a kind of artful kind of approach to anthropological representation. So the power of storytelling, right? So 3 elements in the power of storytelling. One is evoking space and place. One of the things that anthropology does better than just about any discipline is to give the reader, if it's well done, a sense of place. What is this place? What's it like to live there? What does the place smell like? What's the texture of this place? What kind of comfort level do you have in this place? Does your skin itch in the air? Is the air thick? Is it dusty? What is this place? What is it like to live there? Right. So evoking a sense of space and place. The second element of good storytelling is dialogue and conversation, and it is exceedingly difficult to write dialogue that is, that has a faithful to the sort of idiosyncrasies of speech, right? So really, really difficult. So I really admire playwrights who are able to tell fabulous stories just using dialogue. I mean, it's just amazing skill. And finally, the construction of character. What is it about a person that makes him or her unique? What is it about, do they have a particular stare? Is their face set in a particular expression? Do they walk with a certain limp? What's their posture like? Is there a phrase that they use again and again that makes them kind of, interested in, makes them distinct from other people, right? So, I have a number of examples, but I don't know if I'm running out of time. So you evoke space and place. This is from South Africa. What is it about this space? What does it say to you? If you were this person, who is me, actually, I took this photo. That's my shadow. It's empty. Well, what would it be like to live there? What stories are connected to the spaces that are depicted there, right? So there's one. Well, look at this. This is from Ireland's west coast. I took this last April. Look at that space. What stories are there? Shipwrecks, the power of nature. What stories are embedded in that space, in those spaces, in the beach, the water, the sort of power of it? This is a baobab tree at the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana, Legon. Founded in 1960 by Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana. The site of a lot of political and academic, intellectual discussion and debate over 70-year period, right? And so it's the most famous social science institution in all of Africa. This baobab tree is, you can see it right outside the window. So I asked, it's a majestic tree. What has it witnessed? What has it seen? And so I ask people when they take courses from me in writing, I do writing workshops. I say, take a space and consider it to be alive with memory. What are the memories in this building? In the walls, in the ceiling? What stories have been told here? Who has come here before? Have their memories been embedded in this space? Right? So there's an awful lot that you can do to evoke space. So that's. I have one example that I want to read of someone who really evokes space magnificently. If I can find it. So, here it is. So this is from the famous writer James A.G., who wrote a fabulous book about sharecroppers in southern Alabama in the 1930s called Let Us Praise Famous Men. He's describing a sharecropper's room. Just listen. When you listen to this, close your eyes and just listen. And imagine in your mind's eye what this place is like. Every few minutes, George would get up and open the door a foot or so, and it showed always the same picture. That end of the hallway, mud and underwater, where the planks lay flush to the ground. The opposite wall, the open kitchen, blown leaves beyond the kitchen window, a segment of clay rear yard where rain beat on rain, beat on rain, beat on rain, and would beat out the brains of the earth, and stood in a bristly, smoking grass of water a foot high. Wow. Right? So it gives you an idea of how these people struggles in their life. So that's just one example of evoking space and how it's a memorable kind of thing. So second is dialogue, the sense that I call it the sonority of dialogue. This photo here is taken in Brooklyn, and you can't see it, but this is Bob Dylan right here. Bob Dylan. And he is having a tete-a-tete with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the holy, sort of Lubavitcher Judaism, it's a very orthodox sect, where conversation is very important. So dialogue, is really, really difficult. Here's an example. One of my favorite writers, and you can find a good deal about dialogue by reading mystery novels. And one of my favorite ones is Walter Mosley, an African-American writer who writes about African-American street life in Los Angeles and in New York City. And his main character is a guy named Ezekiel Rollins, who's called Easy Rollins. And this is a very short dialogue. But it demonstrates how you can use dialogue to evoke character. My name is Ezekiel Rollins. I held up my hand. A big grin came across her, but somehow the mirth didn't make it to her eyes. She shook my hand. Can I help you? I'm a private detective down in L.A., I said. I've been hired to find a woman named Philomena Cargo by her family. Cinnamon, the woman said without hesitation. Axel's friend. That's Axel Bowers? Yes, he's my partner here. She looked around the storefront. I did too. Not very lucrative business, I speculated. The woman laughed. It was a real laugh. That depends on what you see as profit, Mr. Rollins. Axel and I are committed to helping the poor people of society get a fair shake from the legal system. You both lawyers? Yes, she said. I got my degree from UCLA, and Axel got his across the bay in Berkeley. I worked for the state for a while, but didn't feel very good about that. When Axel asked me to join him, I jumped at the chance. What's your name, I asked. Oh, excuse my manners. My name is Cynthia Aubec. French? I was born in Canada, she said. Montreal. All right, so you got a real sense of character from just that little snippet of character development. Of dialogue. Finally, the construction of character. What is it about a person that makes him unique? And what is it that will have that person jump off the page so that when you finish reading about this person, you'll remember him or her, right? So you combine those three things: the construction of character, the sonority of dialogue, and you combine that with the evocation of space and place, and maybe you get a really good story. I say the best stories are sensuous stories, stories that evoke the senses, that bring a scene or bring a story up, make it alive, make it jump off the page, right? Sensuous storytelling, which involves sound, sight, smell, taste. All these things can be evoked in words that bring the reader into the text that the writer is trying to write. And my suggestion is the art of ethnography, the art of writing social science, is to use these kind of techniques to bring our insights, which are profound insights, but they're often insights that are stuck in sort of expectation. They're stuck in our academic discourse, which tends not to be read too much, which does not bring the reader into the text. And so a lot of our social science insights are lost, or they're unknown, right? And my point at the beginning that I was making was that, we need these insights, which are slowly developed over time, which are important. If they can be brought to the public, they can have a major impact on how we live our lives in the future, and have an impact on how we confront our problems that we are facing today, right? So, so sensuous storytelling is one way of doing that. So, a more intense focus on writing as art can ensure that our slowly developed insights can become fundamental elements in the public sphere, to the public. Elements that contribute directly to healing a world confronting a set of life-threatening social, cultural, ecological, and political crises, right? Which is, sort of, if you read the news, that's what's happening today. So I'm going to end with two things. I want to read a short snippet. During my fieldwork, I happened upon a really fantastic meeting of elders. Right? So, meeting of elders. Not these elders, but other elders. And elders play an important role in many, many societies, not just West African societies, but in other parts of the world. Elders play, they are revered for their wisdom. They tell stories. They tell sensuous stories. They are involved in conveying wisdom from one generation to the next. Right? Very, very important. This is especially in the case in North America with Native Americans. Elders in Native American communities are extraordinarily important presence in those communities. So this is a description of an event that took place in Tillabéri, Niger, in western Niger. I'll just read it. It had been a typically hot season day in Adabuja-Nitongo's Tillabéri compound. Too hot to do anything in the afternoon except lay on a palm frond mat in the shade of the compound's stick and thatch hangar, drink warm water, sip on sweet Chinese tea, swat flies, and talk about the past and present in Tillabéri. The Sohanchi, Adabuja-Nitongo, smiled as he reminisced about some of the good work that he had done, bringing rain to his parched community. And he said, after my work, since then the rains have been just right. Not too much, not too little. We'll make sure to continue our offerings with the help of the King of the Sky, Dongo, the Thunder God. We'll have a good harvest in October. Irukwemeta, said Moro Adabu, my mentor's short, stocky, and round-faced younger son. The haze of the afternoon heat dulled his large brown eyes, which were set far apart on his round face. I hope the offerings are accepted, I said. If our hearts are pure, the offerings will be accepted, Adabuja-Nitongo said. To pass the time of day in hazy heat, the Sohanchi, Adabuja-Nitongo, braided dried grass into rope. Moro dozed. Hoping for a soothing breeze, I read a novel. Eventually, I too dozed off. The sound of men greeting one another aroused me from my heat-induced stupor. My teacher had left his hangar's shade to greet his guests. I nudged Moro, who slowly opened his eyes. What's going on? Those are all sorcerers from the region. Every so often they come here to meet and talk, sort of like a convention, right? It was a sorcerer's convention. I thought to myself at the edge of the village, can I go over there and introduce myself? Moro chuckled. You know who they are. They know who you are. And he pushed himself to his feet. So we went over to greet the men who were there. And there was, not daring to, Moro and I kept over to the side. The men all greeted one another. And there was one man who was seated above the others, who was the oldest of the sorcerers. His name was Jingare Nyandu, the great sorcerer of Walla. Moro pinched my arm. He said, "He's even older than my father." I silently calculated that he would be more than 100 years old. One of the men gave the oldest sorcerer a cola nut. Using his elbow, he asked one of the seated guys, "Usman, tell us what you are doing." Using his elbow, Usman propped himself up on his pillow. "My father," he said to the older man, "I recently used the plant Watagaya Gaya on a woman with stomach pains." "Did it work?" the older healer asked. "It worked very fast, no problems. It's the first time I used it for the stomach." "I've not used it for stomach pain," Adamujin and Tongo chimed in, "but I have great respect for our brother's knowledge of plants. I'll start using it here in Tilliberi." The other practitioners all reported on their latest experiments. For several hours, they shared recipes for potions and discussed the prescription for a particular plant leaf harvested in the daylight as opposed to one harvested at night. They shared information on various uses of plant roots as opposed to plant stems and leaves. They had impassioned debates about the bush. In the bush, they agreed the spirits are powerful, a place frequented by human as well as spirit enemies. Each practitioner spoke of an increasing lack of respect for the old ways and the old words that long ago committed to memory. "Look what the lack of respect has brought us," Jingare, the old man, said. "We have either too little or too much rain. There's not enough food for our families. Children are hungry. People are sick. You can smell death in the air. Niger is a hard country," Adamujin said. "We bring this misery upon ourselves. We have lost respect for the bush." Clicking their tongues against their palates, the men vocalized their agreement. "As elders, it is our obligation," Jingare Nyango said, "to respect the forces of the bush so that we maintain harmony in the village. Yes, we are strong people, but the bush is stronger than we are. We must respect its power. We must continue to teach our people to live in harmony with it. If we try to master the bush will master us. If we try to consume the bush will consume us." With that proclamation, Jingare Nyango stood up, signaling the end of the gathering. He shook Adamujin Tongo's hand, expressed his gratitude for the latter's hospitality. "It's been a good day," Adamujin Tongo said. "May the bush take notice of our fidelity to the old ways," Jingare Nyango said, as he moved toward the entrance of Adamujin Tongo's compound. We returned to the hangar, where we would soon share an evening meal of millet paste smothered with baobab leaf sauce. "This has been a good day," Sohanchi said to me. "You have walked in the bush. You have witnessed its power. Today you learn why we must respect its power." Thinking back to that remarkable edge of the village gathering of the region's senior sorcerers, I began to understand more clearly the importance of the bush. Adamujin Tongo tapped the bush not only to generate his sorcerer's power, but to refine his thinking. During his long life, he attempted to reconfigure the balance between women and men, between haves and have-nots, between culture and nature, between village and bush. That harmony can not only ensure the viability of the bush, but can secure the future of the world. Such, he said, is the wisdom from the edge of the village. So, moving forward, in conclusion, what do we do to take this knowledge? Where do we go? First of all, elders, of course, convey lots of knowledge and lots of wisdom to the next generation, but sometimes elders don't listen to people from younger generations. The most powerful and knowledgeable and wisest elders that I've met always listen to young people and always learn from young people and listened to them, respected them, and in so doing, they expanded their own wisdom, right? So that intergenerational kind of conversation is really important. The other thing is the importance of dialogue, maintaining dialogue. Maintaining a sort of respect for one another, respect for the bush. So moving forward, the choice is stark. We can continue our extractive policies where we pollute, we extract, we extract the social science as well. We extract from the sweep of social life theories and abstract principles. Nothing wrong with that, but the full wonder of life, social life, gets lost unless we attempt to put it into a kind of more narrative perspective where we are able to communicate that wisdom to a larger and larger audience. And it is our obligation as scholars to do that, because ultimately the classical definition of wisdom is constructing or creating knowledge that will make life sweeter for us all. I'll leave you with that sweet thought. Thank you so much for your attention.
I want to thank you, Paul, for coming and sharing some of that wisdom. We do, you know, we can hang around, talk a little bit with Paul. I don't know, you probably have questions, right?
Questions.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Very sorry. I'll let you ask questions first.
Yeah.
In the beginning, when you said you were studying magic with one of the teachers, what were some of the specific things they were trying to teach you?
I had to memorize incantations in Songhay language. I had to memorize, they wouldn't let me write anything down, I had to memorize. So I memorized lots and lots of incantations, recipes I had to learn a lot about plants, where to find them, how to use them, when to harvest them, whether to use the stem or the leaf, and how those plants are used to treat, say, a skin infection or a gastrointestinal disorder. So I learned all those kinds of things. Yes?
Did you and do you still speak the Songhay language?
What?
Do you still speak the Songhay language?
Oh, man. Yeah, sure I do. I can call up my friends in New York and speak Songhay anytime I want, which I do. And I love speaking it, actually. So yeah, it's a wonderful language. It's got great proverbs and wonderful things. Would you like to hear a proverb?
Yes, sir.
Che Fungo Asafandi got 1 foot cannot follow 2 paths. Try it sometime. It's not easy.
Yeah, you got to follow. Yeah, follow up with that.
Yes.
I'm curious, with the culture that's it's very spiritual. Do you think the language plays a part in that, especially in comparison to English, the way we read it?
Well, every language has elements of spirituality in it, So I wouldn't say that Songhay language is any more spiritual than English. It's just, it's articulated. It's people there. I mean, in English, we are storytellers as well, right? And we convey, culture is conveyed through language, and mostly through narratives, telling stories from one generation to the next. That's how knowledge and wisdom is passed from generation to generation. So if it involves spirituality, that's, I think it's not specific to one language or another. Yes?
Hey, I got more of a comment.
Okay.
One, you guys are super lucky to have Dr. Stoller here. I was a student of Dr. Stoller's in 2013 is when I graduated, right? And here I'm back, and I just want to thank you for sharing your wisdom with us now and before, and just kind of really say to y'all, if it wasn't clear, and not to call Dr. Stoller old, but to have the chance to learn from somebody who's learned from a lot of elders themselves, right? When he was your age, and those elders learned from their elders, is like a super, in our society, rare opportunity that you actually have. So just want to say, really take that and listen to this person as you share your space with him on this campus.
Thank you. Yes?
What do you think who talks about the importance of multilingualism and experiencing many cultures or parts of the world in order to broaden our understanding of the world?
I think it's absolutely essential that I always encourage my students to take as much foreign language as possible, because when you learn a foreign language, first of all, learning a foreign language is good for your brain. And secondly, when you learn a foreign language, you open yourself up to experiences you wouldn't have otherwise. Right? So it increases your capacity for comprehension and understanding. And considering the the global integration of peoples in our society, for example. We are multicultural, multilingual. So the more understanding we have of other languages and cultures, the better we are able to get along with one another. And hopefully that will increase as time goes on here in the U.S. and elsewhere.
Having gone through so much of anthropology's theoretical turns since the 70s, I would be interested to know how you maintained a sort of faith in ethnographic representation. Was it coming from your field work, through film? Just maintaining that, I really mean that the faith in representation is something that's unique in anthropology, especially going through all those decades. I don't know if you could speak to that.
Well, I mean, it would take me a long time to go through all of the theories that have come and gone in the last 50 years in anthropology. And they burn very brightly for a long period of time, and then they sort of fade away. I mean, I had the opportunity to study structuralism with Levi-Strauss, and he was my hero, but, he's not, his ideas they're not really they're not used that much anymore. They've sort of faded away. But what our gift to the world is, in anthropology at least, is ethnography, and the books that we produce, describing place, space, character. That's our gift to the world. And ethnography has legs, whereas theories, they come and go, and as they should, because we refine our thinking about these kinds of things, and they are useful. But ultimately, what our legacy is ethnography. That's the ethnographic record is what our great gift to the world is.
Well, I have a follow-up question a little bit. I always tell students that trust is a very big thing. It's very big for the anthropologist to establish trust with his interlocutors, but it's also we have to, as anthropologists, as writers, we have to establish the trust to our readers and to our audience. And often it's because you say things, we have to write in a way that says, well, I was there, right? And so learning a language and being able to drop those terminologies, making those really visceral, vivid descriptions are very, very important. But when whenever I tell stories about your work, right? When my students read your work, we're talking about things that students don't necessarily believe in, right? The phenomena that it's going to take a lot of trust. Now I don't know where I'm going with this, but what is the role for conveying this kind of very alternative knowledge, let's say, to the taking for granted knowledge that your audience wants?
Well, you describe what you do. I think in my work I've tried to describe what I witnessed, right? And I don't necessarily have explanations for what I witnessed. And the idea is that, ultimately, in the late 70s, there was a philosopher named Richard Rorty who wrote a book called Philosophy of the Mirror of Nature. In it, he talks about, ultimately, the quest for truth. Ultimate truth is an illusion. And ultimately, the best thing you can do is create a conversation which is edifying, which increases our curiosity, increases the spread of knowledge, etc., etc. So edifying conversation. And so I put stuff out there, and maybe people believe it, maybe they don't. But if they talk about it, and they talk about it in a kind of, if it triggers conversation about this phenomenon, maybe they'll refine their thinking, maybe they'll feel something they haven't felt before, maybe they'll think something they haven't felt before. And that is, if my writing is able to do that, then I've done my job.
Can it be that there are phenomena that some people see and some people don't? Is there a way that you have that famous quote, right?
Well, our senses, conventional culture kinds of dulls our senses, in a sense. So, for example, there are people in France, in a place called Glace, who they mix perfumes, right? So their senses have to be absolutely refined to distinguish what they need to distinguish to make the perfect perfume. So in order to do that, they have a very bland diet, right? So they have this very, very strict diet of what they can eat and what they can't eat, because the food you eat can affect how your senses smell, right? So my teachers would say, you have to refine your senses in order to see these kinds of things. And it may take you 25 years to do that, right? So, my teacher, Abu Tonga, was able to, he saw things that I couldn't see. Or there was another guy that he had a conversation, I was in his hut, he's having a conversation with his ancestors, and whether they should accept me as a student or not. And he was having this conversation. I said, well, I couldn't hear that. He said, well, it'll take you 25 years before you can hear that, if you will be able to, if you stay here. So, chefs have a more refined sense of taste than the normal person, right? So, it's a question of training and a sensitivity to the importance of sensing the world. And it's a long process. Yeah.
Would you say that the technology we have, particular screens, but even going back to like sensational books like thrillers or things like that, do you think things like that dull your senses?
What, technology?
Yeah, phones in particular, but even sensational literature, things like that. The balance between those people in France who are very dull by it, to experience the senses, the smells, versus understanding, like trying complicated sense.
Well, I'm not so sure technology has, technology gets a bad rap. It's here to stay, and we can use it productively, perhaps even to, enhance our sensibilities. But, it's, what was I going to say? Yeah, so that's a very interesting kind of question. But I wouldn't sort of say that the technology, sort of dulls our senses. What's more important is just being, it's a question of being aware, being present, which is not easy because we live in a world of distraction. Right? It's not easy to be present. I certainly have a hard time. And most of us do, because our attention is distracted, it's diverted elsewhere, bombarded with messages and images and all that sort of thing. Yes?
Sorry, last question. You mentioned structuralism kind of being a bygone theory.
Yeah.
Are there any theories now that you're particularly fond of?
Well, I'm not particular. I'm more of an ethnographic writer than a theorist. But they right now in anthropology, there's a lot of focus on decolonizing discipline. So taking into consideration the sort of the viewpoints of formerly colonized people, publishing their work, respecting their ideas. So there's a lot of emphasis on that sort of thing right now in anthropology, and I think that's an important thing. Whether there's a theory of that, I'm not so sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Paul, and thank you for those